I never told my son what was waiting for him at the lake house. He didn't know it existed, not really. Not as anything more than a memory of childhood summers and his mother's laughter carrying across the water. He thought it was just a place. He had no idea it was a vault. I was at my brother-in-law's place in Sudbury when my phone rang. A Saturday morning in October, frost still on the grass, coffee going cold in my hand. I saw my son's name on the screen and answered on the second ring, the way you do when you're a father and something in your gut tells you not to wait. Dad. His voice was strange, tight in a way I hadn't heard since the night his mother passed. She's gone. She took the truck, and she won't tell me where she went. I found the spare key missing, the one from the kitchen drawer, the one for the lake house. I set down my coffee very carefully on the porch railing. How long ago? Maybe an hour. I tried calling, but she's not picking up. Dad, she had her sister on the phone last night, and I heard her say, she said there had to be something valuable up there. She said you'd been hiding things. She used that word, hiding. I looked out at my brother-in-law's backyard, at the birch trees going yellow along the fence line, at the ordinary Saturday morning continuing without any awareness of what was happening 3 hours north of us. Don't call her again, I said. Don't call her again, I said. Don't call the lake house. Just stay home. Dad, what's up there? What is she going to find? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the last 12 months, about everything I'd watched and waited and quietly arranged. I thought about my wife, Margaret, and the afternoon 4 years ago when she sat across from our lawyer's desk and told him exactly what she wanted done and why. Nothing she can touch, I said. I promise you that. There was a long pause on the other end. I'm sorry, my son said, and I knew he wasn't apologizing for the phone call. His name is Daniel. He's 34 now, and he has his mother's eyes and his grandfather's stubbornness and, until recently, a remarkable inability to see people clearly when he loved them. That last part isn't a criticism. Margaret was the same way. It was part of what made her so generous and so easy to take advantage of, and so beloved by everyone who deserved her. Daniel met Vanessa at a work conference in Toronto 2 years ago. She was charming in the way that certain people are charming, completely and immediately, like a light switched on, aimed directly at you. He called me that same week to tell me about her, and I remember thinking, as I listened to him talk, that he sounded the way he had at 17 when he bought a used car from a man he'd met at a gas station. Excited. Certain. Already in love with the idea. I kept that thought to myself. Margaret always said I was too quick to distrust people, and she wasn't wrong, and I had promised myself after she died that I would try to be more open. I had promised her that, actually, sitting beside her hospital bed in the palliative ward at Health Sciences North, holding her hand while the machines did their quiet work. She said to me, "Don't close up on Daniel. Let him live his life. Trust that we raised him right." I said I would. I meant it. But I also went to see our lawyer the following week and asked him to update everything. Vanessa moved into Daniel's apartment in Mississauga 6 months after they met. I drove down to take them for dinner. A Sunday in February, bitter cold. The kind of night that makes Ontario feel like the edge of the world. She was lovely. Attentive. She asked me about my career, about the years I'd spent as a civil engineer before retiring, about the house I still kept in Timmins. She asked about the lake house. She asked where it was, how big it was, whether I still used it. I told her it was my wife's family's place, and that we'd kept it out of sentimentality more than anything. Small, I said. Old. More trouble than it's worth, probably. She nodded sympathetically and changed the subject. But I noticed she'd asked 3 follow-up questions before she changed it. Over the following year, I noticed other things. The way she angled conversations toward finances. The way she'd mention, casually, something Daniel had told her about his mother's estate, and then watch my face as she said it. The way she came alive whenever the topic turned to property or investments, or what life might look like when I was no longer around to manage things myself. She never said anything overtly. She was too careful for that. But there was a pattern. And once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Daniel proposed to her last Christmas. She said yes before he'd finished the sentence. I hugged them both and told them I was happy for them. That part was half true. I was happy for Daniel, who was looking at her like she was the answer to something. That evening, after dinner, while Daniel was doing dishes, Vanessa sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, very pleasantly, "We should talk soon about estate planning, as a family, so everyone's on the same page." I looked at her. She had her hands wrapped around her wine glass, and she was smiling at me the way you smile when you're delivering a reasonable suggestion. I said, "Absolutely. I'll set something up." I called my lawyer the next morning. Margaret had been meticulous about things like this. That was her background. She'd worked in estate administration for 15 years before Daniel was born, and she'd seen enough fractured families and disputed wills and bitter relatives to know exactly how the story could go if you weren't careful. When she was diagnosed, she moved fast. Everything went into a family trust. The lake house, the investments, the accounts, structured so that the assets would pass to Daniel directly, outside of any matrimonial property claim. She'd been specific about the matrimonial piece. I remember her saying it without any drama, the way she said most hard things. If he ends up with someone who's after what we built, I want to make sure she can't get to it. She wasn't thinking of anyone in particular. She just knew how the world worked. After Christmas dinner with Vanessa, I went back and made one addition of my own, a condition on the distribution of certain assets, requiring confirmation from our lawyer that no active claims or proceedings were underway. Standard protective language, my lawyer said. Clean. Defensible. I also had a conversation with the manager at the Lake House Property Management Company, a man named Gerald, who'd been handling summer maintenance there for 11 years. I told him there might be an unauthorized visit. I told him what to do if there was. Then I went home to Timmins and waited. Daniel had noticed things too, I think, even before October. You can see it now in hindsight. The way he'd grown quieter over the summer, the way our phone calls had started to include longer pauses, the way he'd stopped talking about the wedding date, the way he had in spring. He was doing what people do when they suspect something they're not ready to name yet. Watching. Hoping to be wrong. He'd told me in August that Vanessa had quit her job at the marketing firm, not been let go, quit, voluntarily, on the assumption that with the wedding coming up and my supposed resources in the picture, there was no particular urgency to continue. Daniel had been too surprised to push back in the moment. By the time he told me, it had been 6 weeks, and she'd shown no interest in finding anything new. He also told me she'd looked up the lake house property on the municipal assessment site and found the estimated value. He said she'd brought it up at dinner like a fun fact. Did you know your dad's lake property is assessed at almost $400,000? That's wild. Daniel said he'd felt something shift in him when she said it. The way she said your dad's lake property, like it was already a number in a column somewhere. I asked him if he'd talked to her about it. He said he was still thinking about what to say. I told him to take his time. I said there was no rush. I said the most important thing was that he be sure about what he was seeing before he said anything he couldn't take back. What I meant was, I have already handled the parts that needed handling. You just need to figure out your own heart. She got to the lake house at 10:30 on a Saturday morning, according to Gerald. She used the spare key from Daniel's kitchen drawer, the one Margaret had labeled with a piece of masking tape in her handwriting, the word Wabun written on it in blue marker, the name of the lake. Gerald said she drove up in Daniel's truck, which she'd apparently taken without asking, and she parked and went to the door and let herself in like she owned the place. He watched from the maintenance shed and called me. I was already in my car by then, on the highway north of Sudbury, because I had known since Daniel's call that this was the day. You develop a sense for these things. She'd been circling the lake house for months, asking questions, pulling records, and now Daniel was in Toronto and she thought I was in Sudbury, and there would never be a cleaner opportunity. Gerald told me she spent 40 minutes inside. He said she went through the storage closet in the back bedroom, the one with the old files, the photo albums, the boxes of Margaret's things. He said she came out twice to look in the truck and came back in. And on the second trip she was carrying what looked like a camera bag. She was photographing documents. I pulled off the highway and called my lawyer. I want to explain something about the lake house, because it matters. After Margaret died, I sorted through everything. The bank accounts, the investments, the trust documents, the insurance. It took months. Our lawyer was patient and thorough, and we moved everything that needed moving. The lake house was transferred into the trust. The property was clean. The boxes in the back bedroom closet, the ones Vanessa spent 40 minutes going through, contained Margaret's photo albums, Christmas cards we kept since 1987, Daniel's school reports from elementary school, a plastic bin of his hockey medals, some of Margaret's gardening books, and one fireproof document box that contained exactly 3 things: a copy of our marriage certificate, a copy of Daniel's birth certificate, and a letter Margaret had written to him by hand, meant to be read at a time I would know when it arrived. There were no financial records at the lake house. There was nothing there that could tell you anything about accounts or assets or the structure of the trust. Margaret and I had made sure of that years ago. Important documents lived with our lawyer in Timmins, in a fireproof safe, in a building with a security system. Vanessa spent 40 minutes photographing birthday cards and school reports, and her future mother-in-law's handwriting on the backs of old photographs. I hope she found it educational. I arrived at the lake house at 1:30. She was still there. The truck was in the driveway and there was smoke coming from the fireplace, which told me she'd made herself comfortable enough to light a fire. I sat in my car for a moment, looked at the smoke, and thought about Margaret, who had loved that fireplace, who had spent entire November weekends reading beside it while the lake went gray outside the window. I went inside. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her phone and a glass of water, and when she saw me come through the door, her face went through several expressions very quickly, before settling on something that was trying to be casual, and not quite making it. "Robert," she said, "I didn't know you were coming up." "I could say the same," I said. I took off my coat and hung it on the hook by the door. My wife had put that hook there. I sat down across from Vanessa at the table. "Is Daniel with you?" No. I just wanted to see the place. I've only been up here once. I thought it might be nice to start thinking about the wedding. You know, whether we might use the property. Where's the key?" I said. She stopped. "The key from Daniel's kitchen drawer," I said. "The masking tape one. Where is it?" She reached into her pocket and put it on the table between us. I picked it up and put it in my own pocket. "I want to be straightforward with you," I said. "I think you deserve that." She was very still. "The fire was going in the next room and you could hear it." "I know what you've been looking for," I said. "I know what you've been looking for," I said. "I know you pulled the property assessment. I know you asked Daniel about his mother's estate on at least 4 separate occasions in the last year. I know you've been trying to build a picture of what exists and what it might be worth. And I know that what you found in the back bedroom today was not what you were hoping to find." She opened her mouth. I kept going. "The assets are in a family trust. Have been for 4 years. Margaret set it up before she died, and I updated it earlier this year. The lake house is in that trust. The investment accounts are in that trust. When I'm gone, those assets transfer to Daniel directly, outside of any matrimonial property claim, under the terms of the trust instrument. Your marriage to Daniel would not change that. A divorce would not change that. The trust was structured specifically to ensure that. Our lawyer drafted it, and it has been reviewed. It is not something that can be worked around." She looked at me for a long moment. She was composing herself. I could see it. Deciding what version of this conversation to try. I wasn't trying to. "I'm not angry," I said, and I'd meant it. "I'm not interested in a fight. I'm telling you how it is so that you can make informed decisions. Whatever you were hoping to find here, it isn't here. Whatever picture you'd built in your mind, I'm asking you to set it aside and ask yourself honestly what you want your life with my son to look like." A long silence. Outside, the lake was flat and silver. A pair of loons had come in to winter on the far shore. I'd seen them from the road. "Daniel is a good person," I said. "He's kind and he works hard, and he would do anything for someone he loves. He deserves someone who sees that. Just that. Without the addition. I stood up and picked up her water glass and put it in the sink. I'll wait outside while you get your things. I'll drive the truck back to a place you can get a cab from, or I can call you one now, if you'd rather. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, he doesn't know any of this. About the trust. He knows enough, I said. He'll know everything when the time is right. She left 3 weeks later. A Tuesday, while Daniel was at work. She took her things and her car and left a note on the kitchen counter that said she needed time to think. She didn't take anything that wasn't hers. She didn't make a scene. I give her credit for that. She read the situation and she walked away from it cleanly. And whatever her reasons for coming into my son's life, her reasons for leaving it were at least honest. Daniel called me that night. He was quiet for a long time. I didn't fill the silence. Finally, he said, "Did you know this was going to happen?" "I didn't know," I said. "I thought it might." Another pause. "Why didn't you tell me what you saw?" This was the question I'd been turning over for months, and I had the answer ready, though I'd never quite said it aloud before. "Because I could have been wrong," I said, "and because it needed to be something you came to yourself. I could protect what needed protecting. I couldn't make you see something before you were ready. That part had to be yours." He was quiet again. "She asked me last week if we could redo the prenup," he said. "She said the lawyer who drafted it hadn't been fair. I told her I'd think about it." "What did you think?" "That I was tired," he said. "That I'd been tired for a long time. I thought about Margaret, about the last good summer at the lake, before the diagnosis, when the three of us had sat on the dock past midnight watching the Perseids, and Daniel had said he couldn't imagine ever being happier than he was at that exact moment. His mother had laughed and told him to keep that feeling close, that it would come back. "Come up to the lake," I said. "Next weekend, I want to show you something." We went up on a Friday in November. The water was steel blue and cold, and the birches along the south shore had gone bare. We built a fire in the fireplace, and I made the lamb stew that Margaret used to make in the fall, and we ate at the kitchen table where I'd sat across from Vanessa 6 weeks earlier, and the house felt like itself again. After dinner I went to the back bedroom closet, and I took out the fireproof document box, and I brought it to the table, and I put it in front of Daniel. He looked at it, and then at me. "Your mother left that for you," I said. "She told me I'd know when the time was right. I think this is it." He opened the box. He took out the marriage certificate, the birth certificate, and then the envelope with his name on it in Margaret's handwriting, her careful, looping cursive that he'd known all his life. He held it for a long moment without opening it. I went to stand by the window and look out at the lake so he could have the room. I heard the envelope open. I heard him breathing. I don't know exactly what she wrote. He hasn't told me, and I haven't asked. He was quiet for a long time, and when I turned around his eyes were wet, and he was holding the letter carefully with both hands. "She knew," he said. "She knew a lot of things," I said. "She always did." He folded the letter and put it back in the envelope and held it against his chest for a moment, the way you hold something you're not ready to set down. The fire went on in the next room. The loons called from somewhere out on the dark water. The lake was the same as it had always been, patient and cold and entirely unimpressed with the troubles of the people who came and went along its shores. My son sat at his mother's table, and I made another pot of coffee, and we talked until almost midnight. The way we used to talk when he was young, without any agenda, just the two of us in the place where we'd always known how to find each other. That was enough. That was, in the end, everything. There are things you build in a life that have nothing to do with money. Account balances and property assessments and trust instruments are just tools, useful ones, and I'm grateful we had them. But the thing Vanessa came looking for, the thing she spent 40 minutes photographing in the back bedroom of my wife's lake house, hoping to find the key to something worth taking, she could never have found it, because it doesn't have a lock. It's just a boy who grew up knowing he was loved. It's just a father who kept his promise. It's just a letter in an envelope in a fireproof box, waiting 20 years in a closet for exactly the right November night. Margaret knew that was the only legacy that would last. She was right about everything. She usually was. People sometimes ask me whether I feel any satisfaction about how things turned out, whether I enjoyed watching it all unravel. The honest answer is no. There was nothing enjoyable about any of it. Watching your son love someone the wrong way, knowing what's coming, and not being able to shortcut his path to seeing it. That's not a satisfying thing to live through. It's just hard. You do what you can, and you wait. What I've come to understand, after 64 years of watching people and their choices, is that the outcomes in our lives are not random. They grow directly from what we do, and more importantly, from what we decide to be. Vanessa made a series of choices. She chose to look at a grieving family and see an opportunity. She chose to photograph a dead woman's birthday cards, looking for leverage. Every one of those choices was a brick in a wall she built around herself without realizing it, and when the moment came, that wall had nowhere to fall but inward. I made choices too. Margaret and I both did. We chose to build things carefully. We chose honesty with each other, and with our lawyers, and with the structures we put in place. We chose to protect Daniel not by sheltering him from every hard thing, but by making sure that when the hard thing arrived, the ground beneath him would hold. That's the only kind of protection that actually works. You can't guard someone from experience. You can only make sure they have something solid to stand on while they go through it. Daniel made choices as well, and I think that matters more than anything else in this story. He chose eventually to stop explaining away the things he saw. He chose to feel the tiredness he'd been carrying and to name it. That took more courage than most people would give him credit for. It is not easy to walk toward a truth that costs you something. It is not easy to sit at your mother's table on a November night and open a letter you've been afraid of for years. He did those things. He did them himself. I handed him the box, but he was the one who opened it. There are things you can pass on to your children through money and property, a good trust, a well-drafted will, a lake house maintained for 30 years. Those are real gifts, and I don't dismiss them. But the thing that actually carries a family forward from one generation to the next is something quieter. It's the example of how you treated people. It's the record of whether you told the truth. It's the letter a woman wrote by hand to her son, because she wanted him to know, when the time came, that he was seen clearly and loved completely, not for what he might inherit, but for exactly who he was. Margaret understood that. She understood it better than I did, and she made sure to leave evidence of it behind. That is the only inheritance that cannot be photographed, cannot be transferred, cannot be reached by any instrument a lawyer can draft against it. You carry it in you, or you don't, and if you're lucky, if you raised your child the way we tried to raise ours, they carry it too. Long after the lake house is gone and the accounts are settled and there is nothing left to fight over, that is what remains. I think about that on quiet mornings at the lake. I think about the looms on the water and the fire in the next room and my son reading his mother's handwriting in the dark. I think that she would have been pleased. Not with how it ended. She would have been sad about Vanessa, sad about the year Daniel lost, but pleased that the thing she'd built held. Pleased that when it mattered, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.